He walked into the Callaway estate with a crescent wrench in his back pocket and his daughter's drawing folded in his shirt pocket, right over his heart. That was the part nobody would remember later. Not the wrench, not the drawing. They would remember the car, the 1969 Lamborghini Islero that had sat silent in the climate-controlled garage for 11 days, refusing to start, refusing to cooperate, refusing to do anything except exist beautifully and uselessly beneath the track lighting while 3 different specialty shops scratched their heads and sent invoices. But Dex Farrow would remember the drawing. A crayon house with too many windows and a yellow sun that took up half the sky. His daughter, Poppy, had pressed it into his hand that morning before school, the way she always did when she sensed he needed something to carry. She was 7. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's way of knowing things without being told. He didn't say anything when she gave it to him. He just folded it carefully along a crease that was already worn soft and put it where he always put it. The call had come on a Tuesday evening, while Dex was elbow-deep in a 1972 Chevelle that belonged to a retired schoolteacher named Mr. Aldridge, who had been saving up for this particular repair for most of a decade. The garage was quiet except for the radio, a country station that nobody ever changed because it had been playing when his wife was alive, and the habit had outlasted her. The number that appeared on his screen was one he didn't recognize, Long Island area code. He almost didn't answer. Is this Farrow Automotive? The voice was the voice of a woman accustomed to being understood the first time, low and clear and unhurried. I'm looking for Dex Farrow. You found him. My name is Vivian Cross. I manage estates and private collections for several clients in the Northeast. One of my clients has a vehicle situation that has become frankly a problem. I was given your name by Leonard Beauchamp. He said you were the only person who ever actually fixed his Maserati and not just pretended to. Dex wiped his hands on a shop rag. Leonard Beauchamp was a retired financier who had a farmhouse 30 miles east of Millhaven and a 4-car garage full of Italian vehicles that American shops had no idea what to do with. Dex had spent 4 days on that Maserati 3 summers ago, tracking an intermittent fuel delivery issue that had defeated 2 dealers and 1 supposed specialist. I remember the Maserati, he said. Then you understand what I mean when I say the problem may not be obvious. What's the vehicle? She told him. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the evening was settling over the small town of Millhaven, New York, in its usual unhurried way, the light going amber and long, the hardware store across the street pulling down its shade, somebody's dog moving along the sidewalk with the authority of a creature who owned everything it walked past. All right, he said. Tell me what they've already tried. The Callaway estate was 60 acres in eastern Suffolk County, the kind of property that didn't advertise itself. No gate sign, no name on the mailbox. Just a long gravel drive that curved through old oaks before delivering you to a main house that was large in the understated way of things built before anyone felt the need to impress strangers. The garage was separate, behind the main house, a converted stable that had been fitted with climate control and epoxy floors and the kind of task lighting that made every car inside look like it belonged in a museum. There were 9 vehicles in total. Dex counted them when he walked in, not because he was cataloging, but because that was the way he moved through any space that held mechanical things. Automatically, instinctively, the way a doctor might notice posture in a crowd. A 1958 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL, a 1963 Ferrari 250 GT Lusso, a 1971 De Tomaso Pantera, a 1967 Ford GT40, and then at the far end, the Islero. It was burnt orange, which was not a factory color for the Islero, which meant someone had specified it custom, which meant the car had a history that included at least one person with very specific opinions. Dex liked that. He liked cars that had been loved with enough conviction to be unusual. He stood in front of it for a moment, before he did anything else. Vivian Cross was watching him from near the door. She was somewhere in her late 40s, wearing the particular kind of quietly expensive clothes that people wore when they wanted you to know they were serious without having to say so. She had the face of someone who had spent a career managing other people's problems and had gotten very good at it. 3 shops, she said. The first 2 said it was fuel. The third said it was electrical. None of them fixed it. What does the car do when you try to start it? Cranks but won't catch. Turns over completely fine. Battery is strong, just won't fire. Dex nodded. He already had a theory, But he didn't say it yet, because theories said too early had a way of becoming the thing you looked for instead of the thing that was actually there. Who's the owner? Vivian hesitated slightly before answering. Mr. Calloway is. He's not in a position to be here at the moment. He had a health event late last month. His daughter has authorized the repair. She's the one who found your name. All right. Dex set his bag down and opened it. I'm going to need some time with it alone. Vivian nodded. The house is open if you need anything. There's coffee. I'm fine, he said. And then, because he remembered his manners. Thank you, Miss Cross. She left him to it. He had grown up around cars the way some kids grew up around music or books. Not as a hobby, but as a native language, something absorbed before he had words for it. His father had run a shop in a small town in western Pennsylvania, a town that no longer existed in the way town stops existing when the industry that made them leaves. But the knowledge remained. The feel of a thing, the sound of a problem, the particular silence that meant something was wrong in a way that wasn't going to be obvious. He had gone to college on an engineering scholarship, finished top of his program, taken a position with a major manufacturer that had sent him to Detroit, then to Stuttgart, then back to the States with a title that meant he sat in rooms and thought about how things worked at a scale too large to touch with your hands. He had been good at it. He had been very good at it, but his hands had always missed the actual work, the direct, physical conversation between a person and a machine. Then he met Claire, and Claire became the thing that mattered most. And then Claire got sick, and then Claire was gone. And he had a daughter who was 4 years old, and a career that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone he used to be. He sold the house in Michigan. He moved back east to a small town where he could work with his hands and walk Poppy to school every morning and be home by the time she got off the bus every afternoon. He had enough saved that the garage didn't need to be profitable immediately. He just needed it to be real. He needed to fix things he could actually touch. That was the version of the story he told when people asked. Though he always left out the part about the mornings he sat in the truck in the driveway because he didn't trust himself to go inside and be a father the way a father was supposed to be. He left out the part about the dinners he didn't eat so Poppy could have seconds when the end of the month got tight. He left out the part where she asked him one Sunday, with perfect directness, if they were okay, and he said yes. Because what else do you say to a 6-year-old who has already lost one parent? He folded those parts up small and carried them the same way he carried the crayon drawing. Close, private, not gone, just held. The Islero took him 90 minutes to diagnose. He found it in the distributor, not a failed component, exactly, but a timing issue so subtle that a shop without the specific knowledge of this engine's particular personality would likely overlook it twice before they found it once. The 3.9-liter V12 that Lamborghini had used in the Islero was not a common engine, even by the standards of rare cars, and it had opinions about its own timing that were not fully documented anywhere that most mechanics would think to look. Dex had spent 3 weeks with an engine like this one years ago in Stuttgart, during a period when his employer had been evaluating a collection for potential acquisition. He had read everything he could find. He had, in the particular obsessive way he'd always had about things that interested him, read the Italian service documentation, even though his Italian was limited because the photographs were useful. He did not explain any of this to Vivian when she came back to check on him. He just said, I think I know what it is. I'll need to adjust the timing, and there are 2 components I want to replace while I'm in there. I'd rather do it right than have you call me back in 6 months. Vivian studied him for a moment. How long? Tonight. I'll be done before midnight. She looked at her watch. It was 4:20 in the afternoon. I'll have dinner sent out, she said. You don't have to do that. Mr. Calloway's daughter would like to meet you, if you're willing. She came up from the city. He was about to say it wasn't necessary, that he just needed the parts and the quiet. But something in Vivian's tone suggested the meeting was less optional than it sounded. Sure, he said, after I'm done. He called Poppy at 6 o'clock, the same as every day when he was working late. She was at her friend Lily's house. A different Lily, not one from any list, a kid from her class who lived 4 blocks away and whose mother, Sandra Okafor, had become the closest thing Dex had to a reliable support system in Millhaven. Did you eat? He asked. We had tacos, Mrs. Okafor puts pineapple in hers, which is wrong, but I didn't say that because it's her house. That's very mature of you. Did you find the problem with the car? He had mentioned it at breakfast, the way he always mentioned the work. Not because a 7-year-old needed to know about Lamborghini distributor timing, but because she liked to know where he was and what he was doing. She found it reassuring. So did he, honestly. I found it, he said. Was it obvious? Not really, no. But you found it anyway. I found it anyway. She seemed satisfied with this. They talked for another few minutes about a book she was reading and about whether a dog was a realistic possibility in the near future, a conversation they had roughly every 2 weeks without resolution. And then he said he loved her, and she said she loved him back, in the slightly impatient way of a 7-year-old who was being called back to tacos and a friend's house, and he stood there in the garage with the phone against his ear for a second after she'd hung up, just feeling it. Then he went back to work. The part that none of the other shops had understood about the Islero was not the timing itself. That was findable, if you knew where to look. The part they hadn't understood was what the mistimed ignition was doing to the fuel mixture downstream. The engine had been compensating imperfectly for long enough that the compensation had become its own problem. You couldn't just fix the timing and expect it to run clean. You had to understand the sequence. You had to work backward from where the problem presented and forward from where it had started. This was what Dex meant when he thought about what he actually did for a living, what made the work mean something beyond the transaction. Not the fixing exactly, the understanding, the act of sitting with a problem long enough to see it whole. His wife had said once, watching him work in the garage of their Michigan house on a Sunday afternoon, that she thought he approached engines the way some people approached poetry, looking for what wasn't on the surface, listening for the thing underneath the thing. He had laughed at her. He had said she was giving him too much credit. She had said, very seriously, that she was not. He thought about that sometimes, in the garage late at night, when the town was quiet and the work was the only sound. By 9:15, the Islero was ready. He sat in the driver's seat and turned the key. The V12 came alive with a sound that was, there was no other word for it, authoritative, not loud, not aggressive, but full, like a sentence spoken by someone who knew exactly what they meant. It idled at a steady, even pace that it probably hadn't held in years. He sat with it for a minute, just listening. Then he turned it off, got out, and went to tell Vivian he was finished. The daughter's name was Bren Calloway, and she was waiting in the kitchen of the main house, at a table that probably cost more than Dex's truck, with a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking, and the particular stillness of someone who had received a piece of bad news and was still in the process of figuring out what to do with it. She was in her mid-30s, dark-haired, wearing work clothes that suggested she had not been planning to be here today. There was a legal pad on the table in front of her with handwriting on it that she closed when he came in. "Mr. Farrow," she said, and stood. "Dex," he said. "Dex." She shook his hand with the grip of someone who shook a lot of hands. "Vivian says you found it. Timing issue in the distributor. The engine had been compensating for it long enough that the compensation created secondary problems. I cleaned those up as well. She should run well now." Bren Calloway looked at him for a moment, with an expression he couldn't quite classify. Not disbelief, exactly. Something more like the expression people had when something had worked out and they weren't sure they'd deserved for it to. 3 shops, she said. Over 11 days. I know. And you were here what? 6 hours? About 5. She shook her head slightly. Not theatrically. Just the small involuntary motion of someone recalibrating. My father has a gala, a private automotive exhibition he hosts every summer. Collectors, curators, people he's known for 40 years. It's in 9 days. The Islero is the centerpiece of the display. He was planning to drive it himself, but, she stopped. He's not going to be able to drive it himself. Dex waited. He had a stroke, she said. He's recovering. The doctors think he'll be all right eventually, but not in 9 days. He asked me specifically, before any of this, whether the car would be ready. It's the only thing he's asked about since he came out of the ICU. She said this without any drama, as a fact. I didn't know if I was going to be able to tell him yes. Well, Dex said. You can tell him yes. She looked at him again with that same expression, and then she said something that surprised him. What did it feel like when you heard it start? It was not the question he had been expecting. He had been expecting the bill conversation, or a logistics question about the gala, or something practical. Not that. He thought about it honestly, the way the question deserved. Like a conversation that finally made sense, he said. Like getting to the end of a sentence that's been hanging there unfinished. Bren Calloway was quiet for a moment. My father would like that answer, she said. He talks about his cars the same way. Vivian had the payment process before he reached his truck. The amount was more than he'd quoted, significantly more. The kind of adjustment that communicated something beyond the transaction, something closer to acknowledgement. He almost said something about it. He didn't. He drove back through Suffolk County in the dark, past the long, flat fields, and the lit windows of houses where other people's lives were in progress. He had the window down, because the night was warm in the specific August way that felt like the year leaning into its own end, and the radio was off, because sometimes the quiet was the right thing. He thought about the Islero. He thought about what it meant for a car to hold the shape of someone's life, the way a room holds the smell of a person who has lived there. The particular orange that someone had chosen with conviction, the engine that someone had cared for across decades, the exhibition someone had arranged each summer as a way of saying, "This is what I have loved. This is what has mattered to me. Come see." He thought about his own garage in Millhaven, not climate-controlled, not lit with track lighting, just a concrete floor and a hydraulic lift and a pegboard of tools that his father had owned before him, some of them going back further than that. Not a collection, a workplace, something that existed in the ongoing present tense of use. He thought about Poppy. He thought about the drawing in his shirt pocket, which he would unfold when he got home and tape to the refrigerator beside the previous one, a long, narrow parade of crayon houses with oversized suns. She made one for him every week or so. The practice had started after Claire died, without either of them deciding it. Just appeared, the way certain things appeared between people who needed them. He pulled into his driveway at 11:43. The house was quiet. Sandra Okafor had put Poppy to bed in the guest room, which was the arrangement on late nights. He went in quietly, hung his jacket on the hook by the door, washed his hands at the kitchen sink. He stood in the kitchen for a moment before going to check on her. The night had the specific weight that working nights always had. Not heaviness exactly, more like density, like the hours had more in them than regular ones. He had done a real thing today. He had understood a problem that other credentialed people with more resources had not understood, and he had fixed it. And somewhere in eastern Suffolk County, a man in a hospital was going to hear from his daughter that the car would be ready for the gala, that this one thing had been resolved, that not everything was wrong. It wasn't nothing. In fact, it was, in its quiet way, everything. He went to the doorway of the guest room and stood there a moment in the dark, the way you did when a child was sleeping and you just needed to confirm it. The specific relief of a parent, animal, and wordless, that the small person is there and breathing and still. Poppy was on her side, curled around a stuffed rabbit that was missing one eye and had been through the wash so many times the color had faded to something that was more memory than pink. Her breathing was even and slow. On the nightstand, he had to look twice to make sure he was seeing it right, was his red toolbox. The small one he kept in the truck. She must have carried it in from the back seat the last time she'd ridden with him and left it here, the way she sometimes appropriated things of his that she didn't want to be without. He stood there a moment looking at it. The red of it was the same red it had always been, dented in the same places it had always been dented, the latch slightly loose from 10 years of opening and closing. He thought about what she'd said that morning when she handed him the drawing. She hadn't said anything, actually. She'd just held it out and waited until he took it. That was her way. She didn't explain things. She just offered them. He reached over carefully and touched the top of the toolbox, once lightly, the way you touch something you were glad to see. Then he went to his own room, sat on the edge of the bed, and unfolded the drawing from his pocket. Yellow sun, too many windows, a house that looked like no house that existed anywhere, except in the specific visual logic of a 7-year-old who believed the world could be made right by adding more light to it. He sat with it for a moment in the dark. Then he folded it back along the worn crease and put it on the nightstand, and that was where it stayed.